Okay, good evening, everybody. My name, for those of you who don't know, is Gerard Gilligan, and it is indicated down here. We would ask you just to repeat to mute yourselves and also turn your video off. It just helps with bandwidth so we don't lose signal during Jonathan's presentation. Just a few words from me first. Of course, first of all, welcome, a happy new year to you all. Also a happy Burns night. Hope you've got some whiskey in your tea or coffee. This is the first Society of the History of Astronomy webinar for this year, and we hope there will be many more. As it's already been indicated, Jonathan has already allowed us to record this webinar, and there will be a question and answer session at the end. You can use the chat device below there to put your questions, and I'll try and get to them as best I can once Jonathan has finished talking. But if you wish to ask the question yourself, use the hand indicator, which is on the side there or below to the reactions. So perhaps the thumbs up, like you can see on my screen, and then I'll try and get to you. But there are over 40 people on tonight's webinar, so that's what we'll do. Okay, so without further ado, and before we get too late and we will have to put our pajamas and night clothing on, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for tonight, Jonathan Powell. Jonathan is a contributor to the BBC Sky at Night magazine with articles also published in the Astronomy Now magazine. He has written several books, one of which was entitled Cosmic Debris, Rare Astronomical Signs and Sounds, which was selected by the Choice magazine as an outstanding academic title for 2019. And from Cave-Art to Hubble, Jonathan has also worked on BBC Wales as their astronomy correspondent. He is currently the astronomy and space columnist of the South Wales Argus. His presentation tonight is entitled Reading Between the Lines, Important Astronomical Observations and Inadvertently Captured with Diary Entries. When diaries serve more than just a hook purpose in one's life, history recounts these daily diary entries replied much more than musings about their lives and acquaintances that they knew and the fashions of the time. Contained within these diaries are dated, stamped observations of events that took place in the night sky, sightings that give eyewitness accounts of astronomical occurrences that were not chronicled elsewhere, making them significant nuggets of information. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce and ask you to give a warm welcome to Jonathan Powell. Jonathan.
Very good evening. Thank you very much indeed. Very kind of you. Very glad to be here this evening. I hope the talk ahead of us is going to be something of interest to you. I feel like it's a bit like the Colosseum this evening because I was speaking to people probably with a far greater knowledge with regards to the history of astronomy. But the article actually came around. The last book that I wrote was From Cave-Art to Hubble, and it examined how across the centuries humankind has recorded in various guises certain astronomical events that may well have not have been caught elsewhere. So tonight really it's a journey almost. What we're going to from the start, which will encapsulate a time period which sadly probably doesn't exist in its true form now, but that'll become apparent as the talk goes on. We start from the very early days of the potential to record events in the night sky. Then we go through the sort of 16th century, when it became more prolific with the diarists of the time to actually note down not just everything within society, but fortunately astronomical events that were taking place. And to the present point now, well, we're posing the question as to what sort of recording of the night sky can we look forward to in the future. So let's begin by looking at I believe I am sharing, aren't I?
Yes, it's fine. Yes, if you wanted to start this show. Yeah.
No problem. And it's clear enough coming through.
That's coming very clear. Yes, thank you.
No problem. Okay. So there we
We're
are.
only in your design view at the moment, Jonathan.
Beg your pardon?
We're only in your design view at the moment, not a slideshow.
Right. Okay. I'll just put that around it. All right. Just bear with me briefly. Sorry.
Got to slideshow and begin.
No worries. I'm on it.
Okay. Oh, I see. You might be on two screens, are you? Yeah.
Yeah, what have I done? I've got my technical advisor with me. What have we done there? It should be off on that, shouldn't we?
Okay. I think we're okay now.
Yeah.
And then just lovely.
Yeah, that's okay.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Okay. Yeah, just to explain as well that yeah, it is broadcasting from South Wales this evening. Unfortunately, my mother took a terrible tumble over Christmas time. I've had to move in with my father to look after him, and so things aren't where they really should be at this particular juncture. And you may well hear noises that I've been unfortunately unable to screen out, like the clock chiming at certain times. But there you are. So anyway, we'll start our journey right the way back with cave art. Yeah, and it's necessary to go back, I think, this far to look at cave art because it shows the first instances of how things were recorded before we got to the written word. Then we'll move on to stone tablets, many of which have chronicled events from comet sightings to aurora to working out or monitoring the rise of certain stars that would, during a full term of a year, say when to plant harvest, when to harvest it. And so it's that is a very important stage as well, which we'll look at. And then to really what the crux of what the article was about in the Sky at Night magazine, the likes of Samuel, who kept obviously prolific diaries at the time, and not only looked at the life in which he was leading, the social life in which he was leading, but also managed to capture certain astronomical events that may not have been captured elsewhere or not as prolifically as Pepys would have written. And there's one particular section of what Samuel Pepys has written, which I find that is intriguing because he's able to portray it in a way which not only is in diary form, but it gives us an essence of how society was reacting to what was at the time the sort of appearance of the telescope. So we'll be looking at that in more detail as well. And also, once that era had finished, why the advent of the computer sort of changed things completely. So that I mean, the diary itself never really did die out, but the way in which it was managed and the ability to capture what it did was greatly more prolific then than it is now. But the time that we're moving into is sort of closed, has brought that era to a close. So it's, in a way, it's quite sad. It's rather like the demise of the handwritten letter to the postal system and being replaced by email, whereas it's more convenient. There's something like, there's not something, I mean, if it's obviously a family friend or an acquaintance to have a handwritten letter, and growing up, that was something for me that was fantastic, just to have that. But email has replaced that, and it's become, in other words, sort of a moribund phase where we had those diaries to what it is now. And of course, as technology goes on, it's becoming to the point now where maybe we are entering an era where the recording of certain astronomical events will be confined to computer chips, and that is sad in my opinion. When I first started in astronomy in the early 1980s, I was with the Junior Astronomical Society, as it was then, for it turned to the Society of Pop Astronomy, with the BAA, and also with Cardiff Astronomical Society. And I recall making a daily log myself in the early 80s of all the sky observations that I was making, and that went on and on and on for 4 or 5 years. And I had a stack of diaries, all with my own entries, all with my own observations. And for me, that was a formative point and a formative part of my knowledge of astronomy, because as the years and the seasons passed, it was almost like old friends were reappearing once again when you saw Orion coming back, and you saw sort of Lyra and the likes of Cygnus. And so it would be sad to think that the way in which we have bonded with the sky through the written word is going to be lost. But it appears that there was a time frame for all that to happen, but maybe we've shifted perhaps a little bit too far now and lost some of that connection that we had. Now, first and foremost then, I mean, one of the most striking and imaginative insights into the life and times of ancient civilizations comes from the form of artwork, these sketches and paintings that were left on the walls of caves. From here, sometimes in a very uncomplicated format, many events were recorded in graphic form. Now, whereas we have the written word would in many cases not be challenged, because what was written down, it wouldn't be challenged in terms of meaning or the offer of multiple interpretations about what if you see a bright comet and you write about it and you're able to draw it. For example, you've got a pretty compact observational package there as to its time and its brightness, for example. But some of the cave paintings have caused much debate as to what the artist was trying to convey through their medium. So aside from the possibility that cave art was just a means of decoration, the very fact that the artist had taken the time to create the actual drawing itself, without them probably knowing, they actually created a pictorial representation of the times in which they lived. Rather like the diary entry, this was their own entry from these prehistoric times on the cave wall or whatever dwelling they had. So a very vivid piece of history stored on a cave wall, which gave the future generations, it's a valuable portal, if you like, into the past. Indeed, bar fossils, I would have thought it's the only portal of its kind. But what we're trying to look at, or what they have been trying to look at, is whether or not there is a meaning behind the actual artwork itself. Now, some scientific quarters claim that there is a key or a code that may exist within the artwork, and that the paintings may have been a way of transmitting information. I'm not overly sold on that one, to be quite honest. But it is something that has been at the forefront of the last couple of decades. Perhaps a more rational explanation leans towards a religious or ceremonial purpose for the decoration of wall art. But prehistoric men may have painted animals to catch their soul or spirit in order to hunt with more ease, or perhaps the vision painting of an animal on the wall was merely some way of paying homage to the surrounding nature and environment in which they lived. It's sort of a capturing a still life picture of what was outside to reflect the sort of time period. Now, another theory proposes that animal images were in fact actual records of hunts that served the dual purpose of making an inventory of kills that were being made by the occupants of that cave. So it's like we killed so many at this particular point, and noting down for future reference the animal migrating pattern. So if they had a log on the wall of what was being killed at a certain point during the year, they'd say, well, look, at this time last year, and don't think that they couldn't make that reference. We have quite a good grasp to understand that, seeing as we did think that they were recording constellations or whatever, they would have seen that come and go annually. And if that was to be tied in with certain migratory patterns of animals, that would of course mean that there was a certain time of year when they were more likely to make the kill or make a significant series of kills, which would like a harvest become a very dependent part of their year. Now, another theory suggests that the art was a method that humans used to cope with, believe it or not. And this was, I think this wouldn't have been thought of maybe I don't know, 50 or so years ago, but it was some way in which when they were actually painting on the walls, some method of coping with a constant struggle of survival. Surely one of the earliest forms of self-help. I don't particularly buy into that. I don't think they probably, I don't know, but I would have thought that they would have found other forms of therapy rather than drawing on the wall. I believe it is a reflection of the time period. Now, in November, 5 years ago, or nearly 4 to 5 years ago, 2018, the researchers at the University of Edinburgh published findings that suggested prehistoric cave dwellers had quite a sophisticated knowledge of the skies, and in particular the constellations, as we see there. Once this particular piece of cave art was looked at, and you probably see like a bison or whatever it is from the owner, you wouldn't think any more of it. But you can analyze and you can build in certain patterns and into it, which would then create a night sky effect. So in essence, without going too far, in order to elaborate on the drawings that were there, the foundations of portraying what was in the night sky via cave art was, you could really realize that is a possibility. The researchers studied a number of caves containing such artwork in Turkey, I believe it was France, Spain, Germany, and the artwork showed a consistent set of symbols, keys, if you like, not a key code to the future, but keys that were a running theme throughout them, revealing how ancient civilizations actually tracked astronomical events, with a distinct parallel between the animal-based shapes of our constellations and signs. There is also a correlation between the animals and the placement of the stars at a specific time. So there you go, the research tending to suggest that what was drawn at certain times of the year, and probably given markers as well with regards to the length of sunlight that was being seen during that time, the correlation that appears to be there. They looked through examples of Paleolithic and Neolithic art throughout the 4 countries, that's Turkey, Spain, and France and Germany, in order to decode the specific symbols that had been chosen to represent. So the study actually went on to show that what they did was they set about chemically dating the paints that had been used on the walls, and in conjunction with employing astronomical software, they were able to compute the position of constellations at the relevant solstices and equinoxes. So really, the computer software allowed them to actually mirror what humankind would have saw at that particular time, or what they probably would have been putting on the walls. So the cave art itself reveals that humans from as long as 40,000 years ago do appear to have accurately kept track of time by watching how stars slowly change their positions in the night sky. And at every site visited, the cave artists practiced a method of timekeeping based on astronomy, despite the fact that the paintings were situated in 4 different countries and separated in time by tens of thousands of years. So those 4 sample points coming together to give the same feedback that it did appear that the observations of the night sky were actually being correlated between these four countries, and the dating of the actual paint that was used, it all seems to come together, and it would now seem to be a conclusive, or near enough conclusive, argument to say that this was what was happening. But it does confirm that the findings confirm a greater level of understanding amongst our primitive ancestors than was ever previously thought. And what was being depicted with a concurrent theme throughout the method of record keeping that, by its limited complexity, revealed that ancient humankind actually had a much better understanding of the night sky than we originally gave them credit for. And it's important we look at this because it is the first stage, if you like, of how the night sky was being recorded before we moved down the centuries. There are some there's much great debate still going on about the capturing of a supernova. I believe it's the Crab Nebula, and any interpretations of that. There seems to be some sort of, well, the debate is out there, the jury's out on that. I'm pretty convinced that it actually was, but some of the cave art depicting other things bar constellations. But there you go. It was certainly a time when it does appear that not just for recreational, it was that they were taking more interest in the night sky than we currently gave them credit for. Now, of course, not all diaries, as we know, are handwritten, and the Babylonian astronomical diaries were committed not to paper but to stone in cuneiform, which was a symbolic type of script. And on one particular tablet, which is thought to be the oldest known significant astronomical text, it lists the first and last visible risings of Venus over a 21-year period. So not only, whereas the cave art may have been slightly more ad hoc, slightly more loose in its interpretation, these Babylonian astronomical diaries were kept with a regimented order of discipline as to what was being in the night sky. Of course, they had a whole plethora of people who actually made these recordings, which is why they were able to present them in such an articulate way. But another tablet could also be the earliest reliable account of the aurora borealis as well, which is thought to have been captured on one of these tablets. And the diary-like text made by official astronomers during the 37th year of King Nebuchadnezzar II describe an unusual red glow in the night sky, which corresponds to the 12th, 13th of March in 567 BC. So once again, with the use of astronomical data and the ability to spiral back through history to find out what events were around at that time, it would appear to be that this particular bank of information from cave art onto cuneiform tablets was another great source to look through and read astronomical events. Very keen scholars and scientists of the time, or lay scientists at the time, but these tablets not only reflect the lives and the social lives, but it also gave us a great insight into the world of astronomy, and particularly this potential of having seen the first aurora borealis, which was noticed as a red glow, and the corresponding data that says, yes, at that time, that cuneiform tablet did indeed record that particular sighting. Now, during the centuries, apart from dedicated diarists to whatever was going on during certain time periods, we find that a lot of journals, especially from the world of religion, have spawned quite a number of astronomical sightings over the years. And these journals, it's strange when you're reading through the writings of the daily lives of within a monastery and the workings of what was going on and the prayer regime and what was there, and all of a sudden one diary will have the monk glancing out of the window, whoever's writing the actual diary at one point, just make a rather brief note of something quite dramatic that is going on outside. Maybe an eclipse is taking place, but it's strange that you go through the list or through the actual writings of some of the religious texts, and all of a sudden they go really left of field, completely to one side, and then to make this note. But in that context, in the fact that you've got reams of entries made at this time, all of a sudden you just get this one solitary paragraph that says, and that may well describe an eclipse. That in itself, like Gerald said in the introduction, that's a nugget, because that could well be one of the only actual visual sightings that was made at that time and recorded at that time, no matter how brief, where it was observed from, or how sort of loosely documented it was. That's the nugget, because it means that at some point in that particular time somebody was looking at it. And before maybe the dedication of astronomers to make these sort of notes was around, it's these sort of writings, these sort of documents that were made at the time that are so fabulous, because what they actually reveal is, like I say, not only normal life, but these little snapshots into what was going on outside. Now, John of Worcester, a monk, died around circa 1140. The earliest known sunspot record was discovered in the chronicles that was written. It's the Chronicle of John of Worcester, and this was dated the December the 8th, 1128. Now, it reads like this, and forgive me for the way in which I'm going to read this. You probably pick up on some of the grammatical pronunciations that are made, but I'd like to read you the segment, which I will do with the rest of it as well. In the 3rd year of Lothair, Emperor of the Romans, in the 28th year of King Henry of the English, in the year of the 470th Olympiad, in the 2nd year of the 7th indiction, 25th moon on Saturday, the 6th of the Ides of December, 8th December, there appeared from the morning right up until the evening 2 black spheres against the sun. So this does appear to be the actual witness. Now, the text actually translates. So from the morning to evening appeared something like 2 black circles within the disk of the sun, the one in the upper part being bigger, the other in the lower part smaller. Now, the fact that the Worcester monks could apparently distinguish the dark central umbra from the lighter penumbra that surrounds the sunspots suggests that the spots must have been truly and exceptionally large. Looking on it in a sort of a modern terminology and the way in which we observe sunspots now, and the way it's been, I'd struggle in a way to think and look at this as if, I mean, there must have been absolute whoppers on the sun's disk to have appeared like this. And it does appear to me rather strange that they were able to observe it with such clarity. But and to have sunspots that size on the disk, something doesn't gel quite right. However, it has been disputed. But it does appear, from that particular text, it is apparent that the monk recorded seeing 2 unusually large sunspots. But of course, there is much to actually. And you probably say, well, they just don't get that large. That's just abnormal. And so we can feel that out for an explanation as to what they saw. One possible saving grace from the actual the sunspot record that was made by John of Worcester on December 8th, 1128, is the fact that 5 days later in southern Korea, a brilliant aurora borealis was observed. And given the time frame between the sighting of the sunspots made by the monks in John of Worcester, it may well be evidence to suggest that they indeed or did indeed witness those sunspots. But it's very much open for debate. But obviously something was sighted. It may well tie in with the aurora borealis. But my question would be, how was it observed? Sunspots and the size of those sunspots, something just doesn't gel there. but he'd like to think it was, because something happened on that day, something was witnessed on that day. As to actually what, there you go, there's the question. But it's the fact that it was recorded. That's what I'm trying to get at with this presentation. The fact that it was recorded gives us something to work on, and it's a spectacular insight into something that we probably would have missed or not seen. The actual chronicles themselves by John of Worcester contain a number of records of other celestial phenomena, including comets and meteor showers. So not a one-off instance with regards to the observations of the sky, but maybe a debatable argument as to what exactly they did see, what he did see with regards to a possible sunspot. Gervais of Canterbury, another monk. I talked about the monks and their observations. He was 1141, 1210. English monk Gervais of Canterbury witnessed Mars crossing the disk of Jupiter on the morning of September the 12th, 1170. Or to be more precise, it looks like he caught the end of the transit, the event ending just as the planets were rising in the dawn sky. The first Western-based observational jottings of a planetary transit. It was also possible that 5 monks, this is one that's actually recorded in, I put it through in the Sky at Night magazine. An interesting one, this one, and a thing of great debate. 5 monks reportedly having sighted our dear old moon taking a walloping from an unknown body on the evening of June the 18th, 1178. From the description of fire and sparks spewing forth from the lunar surface, a possible impact may have been witnessed once again. So I'll read you the text that was written, and from that you can I mean all of what is a fair proportion of what is being spoken about tonight is still very much in the debating forum, but that's what it's all about. I think that's what that's the real interest is to discovering exactly what they did see. And the actual journal entry goes: the upper horn of the moon split in two. From the midpoint of the division, a flaming torch sprang up, spewing out over a considerable distance fire, hot coals, and sparks. Meanwhile, the body of the moon, which was below, as it were in anxiety, I beg your pardon. Meanwhile, the body of the moon, which was below, writhed as it were in anxiety, as to put it into words of those who reported it to me and saw it with their own eyes. The moon throbbed like a wounded snake. Afterwards, it resumed its proper state. This phenomenon was repeated a dozen times or more, the flame assuming various twisting shapes at random and then returning to normal. Then, after these transformations, the moon from horn to horn, that is along the whole length, took on a blackish appearance. I have to say, I mean, of all of the diary entries that we've come across, that I've come across and read, it's beautifully descriptive, and that's what I love about these. Is once we moved on from the sort of snapshots from some of the monastery kept texts, you get this lavish description of what was going on, and that's the beauty of these things. You can almost visualize exactly what is being said rather than the bullet point delivery of brightness, of of size. This is wonderful. Now, in 1976, a geologist proposed that what had been described was the actual formation of the crater Giordano Bruno. Now, modern theories suggest that an asteroid or a comet impact on the moon would cause a plume of molten matter rising up from the surface, which would be consistent with the monk's description. And in addition, the location recorded fits in well with that of Giordano Bruno. Additional evidence of Giordano Bruno's youth is a spectacular ray system that it still has, because micrometeorites constantly rain down. They kick up enough dust to quickly, in geological terms, erode a ray system. So it can be reasonably hypothesized that Giordano Bruno was formed during the span of human history, perhaps in June 1178. So did they witness? Is that what they witnessed that night? Is that what they saw, that the moon being struck in that certain way? Well, an alternative theory holds that the monks just happened to be in the right place at the right time to see an exploding meteor coming at them and aligned with the moon. So what you have to look at now is a sort of alignment that was coming in their direction. Then that would explain why the monks were the only people known to have witnessed the event. Such an alignment would only be observable from a specific spot on the Earth's surface. So an impact on the moon, a large rock, it's not impossible. And the Giordano Bruno crater formation actually being seen and witnessed in this text that is backed up by some of the geological claims. Or was it merely that the 5 monks happened to be stood in exactly the right position to see an exploding meteor that appeared to be aligned with the moon? Again, possibility of great debate as to exactly where we are with that. John Evelyn, diarist, 1620 to 1706, and John records the solar eclipse of 1652, and the way in which he's written it. This is a not a rather lavish one, but well, you make of it what you will. Was that celebrated eclipse of the sun so much threatened by the astrologers, and which had so exceedingly alarmed the whole nation that hardly anyone would work nor stir out of their houses? So ridiculously were they abused by knavish and ignorant stargazers. So I think what he's trying to get at there is the actual eclipse itself taking place, and maybe the alarmist nature, because of course, as with the arrival of comets down the centuries, solar eclipses foreboding that they meant, or they had some. When you look at the arrival of Halley's Comet in 1911, the last but one orbit of the Earth, because of the way in which the press was structured, then they were able to really sell it as a doom-laden event. And eclipses would also carry that threat. And I believe that eclipses have also brought certain warring factions to a halt. When the eclipses appeared, they haven't seen it as a foreboding element, but also I think it's called a halt to a war in its actuality of happening. However, the eclipse that John Evelyn, the diarist, saw of 1652, it cast complete darkness over Scotland and much of northern England. And of course, as we know, with the line of the eclipses, or an eclipse itself, it's like a corridor of totality that runs, and then you sort of have the percentages drop away, penumbral as to exactly how the eclipse is seen. And it took a diagonal track across Pembrokeshire, so we're talking about sort of Carmarthen way, sort of Tenby, Saundersfoot, the Lake District, and Scotland from the southwest to the northeast. However, it was such a memorable and terrifying event. It went on to be known as Black Monday for years to come. So maybe that ties in nicely with the way in which John Evelyn describes that solar eclipse. I think he's rather dismissive in what he's saying. It was predicted, but bar humbug sort of attitude towards it. But it was known as Black Monday for years to come. Didn't get a picture of Alice, I'm afraid to say. Should have looked harder for that. But Alice Thornton, author, 1626 1707.
Okay.
A new and from what I've looked upon with Alice, a newly married and pregnant Alice Thornton living in Yorkshire described her experience of an eclipse. It was the first book of My Widowed Condition, and in quite lavish terms as well. And if you can try and picture what she's writing about now, this is an eclipse that's taking part. Normally, of course, if it was more analytical and information driven, it wouldn't look anything like this whatsoever. But it's rather like a Gainsborough picture. It's a lovely atmospheric description of what's going on at the time. And bear with me with some of the actual script that what she's written here. We just have to read between the lines. At which time, when the eclipse was about to commence, she was big with child, and the sight of it much frightened me. It being so dark in the morning at breakfast time, and came so suddenly on us that in the bright sunshine morning, he, I presume this is a family member, could not see to eat his breakfast without a candle. But this did amaze me much, and I could not refrain from going into the garden and look at the eclipse in water, discovering the power of God so great to a miracle, who did withdraw his light from our sun so totally that the sky was dark, the stars appeared, and a cold storm for a time did possess the earth, which dreadful change did put me into most serious and deep consideration of the day of judgment, which would come as sudden and as certainly upon the earth as the eclipse fell out, which caused me to desire and beg of His Majesty that He would prepare me for this great day in repentance, faith, and a holy life for the judgments of God, which is just and certain upon all sins and sinners. So she obviously reflects there. And what's an interesting note as well is the fact that on a more practical note, she actually viewed the eclipse in water, presumably because she knew that staring directly at the sun could potentially damage her eyes. Perhaps she had a pond in her garden, or maybe she filled a bucket. But apparently around this time, it was common knowledge, as it is now, of course, that looking into eclipses could damage the sight. So even then, they were taking safeguard against it. But you can see by the text there, as she describes the actual eclipse itself, that whereas before, maybe when we're looking back, the eclipse would bring an omen of fear into what was actually appearing, or it would sort of demonstrate a demonstration, if you like, of some sort of power that would instill this terrible fright. A lot of the text there relates to it being a judgment day, filling with dread, and God-driven and whatever. But the dramatic, what she intertwines in that is the cold storm. Of course, as the shadow sweeps, we all know that there's a distinct cold chill that accompanies it as the actual eclipse approaches. The temperature drops away. Certain animals react. It's an eerie stillness. Now, whereas we can now make a concerted, we can say, well, this is why that's happened. This is why it's feeling this way. Then, when it goes all cold, it really must have seemed like a judgment day, like all of a sudden the world was coming to an end, and God-fearing citizens felt that was the time where they were about to be judged for things that they had done. Now then, the master himself, Samuel Pepys, diarist, 1633 to 1703. Now Samuel started the diaries, the famous diaries, in 1660, as England returned to having a monarchy in the guise of Charles II. Pepys, of course, who lived at the times of Oliver Cromwell, the Great Plague, and the Great Fire, was also an MP. In fact, at one point, I believe he got locked in the Tower of London. But he wrote a lot of astronomy, but in particular his passion for telescopes. So not only astronomical events themselves, but the era of the telescopes, and several entries around the 1664 comet that he observed as well in December are made, and also a description of a bright meteor seen overhead in May 1668. The diaries of Pepys recorded events from the 1st of January 1660 to the 31st of May 1669. It was the fear of blindness that accounted for the diary finishing prematurely. However, his condition did not prevent him using microscopes or telescopes. Now, this for me is one of the big jewels in in the presentation itself, and rather sad to get quite excited about it, but I was at the time. Now, Richard Reeves, a scientific instrument maker of the time, and there were many, because we've got to see that we've got to understand that the telescope was now coming to the fore in many forms, and now luckily we had the likes of Pepys to record what was going on here, and Richard Reeves, the instrument maker, who just didn't specialize in telescopes. It was various instruments, microscopes, whatever. Now he features significantly in the diary entries relating to telescopes, and was described at the time as the leading glass grinder of the day, whose services were eagerly sought by the Royal Society, and who manufactured some of its finest optical instruments. And indeed, Reeves supplied Pepys with his first binoculars, which he recorded in a diary entry on the 23rd of March, 1660. Now, here's a nugget. Here's a nugget. He had been involved with John Cox, another instrument maker of the time, in trying to produce a suitable mirror for James Gregory's idea, yet another telescope maker, of the reflecting telescope in 1663. So we got an amalgamation of people trying to bring together the idea of the reflecting telescope. Now, they failed to achieve this, and Gregory, that's James Gregory's idea of the reflecting telescope, Gregory, in quotes, went off in disgust, giving his name to the Gregorian telescope and leaving Newton, one Sir Isaac Newton, with a clear field. So Newton varied the arrangement of a secondary ellipsoid mirror with a flat, which reflected the image into an eyepiece at the side of the tube, and the Newtonian reflector came into existence. Fabulous. That in itself is fantastic. The actual recording of what was going on at the time, and how certain events, even with the disgust of this chap, led to Newton having the field clear to develop this and come up with the Newtonian reflector. It's fantastic that was recorded at the time. And you can, and whereas you say, well, certain things are invented, this is done, we have a clear pattern, story here as to how it came about. That's absolutely fantastic, because it gives us something that we wouldn't have had unless that these sort of diaries existed. It's interesting to note that during the time that telescopes came to the fore, which they were, along with a plethora of other instruments, some of now which are moribund, not used anymore, but the microscope and the telescope itself, there seems to have been a plateau phase, which heralded the decline in the interest as to what could be seen by the telescope. So, with the use of the telescope and then the observations of Jupiter and Saturn, of lunar observations and anything else they could look at, they thought to themselves that they'd actually hit, and in quotes, hit the ceiling of optical technology. They did not believe that they could actually improve on what was being seen at the time. So I believe diary entries with regards to astronomy generally dropped by something like 25% at the time, because they thought, I don't know if this is ignorance or arrogance or whatever, that they thought that the optical technology had got to a point where now, unless they seriously invest in something larger, they'd hit the ceiling of what could be seen. So it was just rehashing certain things. Slight naivety, really, because if you just kept watching certain things, you'd have probably seen the moons of Saturn, the Jupiter moons. You'd have seen other things taking place, but it certainly did go into a decline once they thought they'd see all of they can see. Now, this is another interesting diary entry from Samuel Pepys, and you have to forgive the way in which it's written, but it does go to show that despite the advent of the telescope, it was not being used all the time for what it should have been used. And on April the 8th of the same year, that had been 1660, Pepys was using his optical aid equipment on board a ship. Of course, he was heavily involved in navigation, cartography, and at sea. And he records that the lieutenant and I lay out of his window with his glass, the telescope, looking at the women who were on board, of two merchantmen as they passed, being pretty handsome. So obviously, out of context and out of looking at the night sky, these And I suppose for scientific purposes, they were just seeing exactly what the telescope could achieve. And this voyeurism was apparent again on the 26th of May, 1667, when Pepys actually wrote about church-going activities, would you believe? And he wrote it like this. He said, "I did entertain myself with my perspective glass up and down the church, by which I had the great pleasure of seeing and gazing at a great many fine women, and what they were wearing at the time, and sleeping. I passed away the time till the sermon was closed." So attending church took on a whole new meaning with this brand new optical aid that he had. Now Reeves, as we mentioned earlier, he bought 2 telescopes for a trial outing on the evening of August the 7th, 1666. So they're close friends by the seam of it, Reeves and Pepys, and Pepys recorded it being mighty fine bright night, and so upon my leads, though very sleepy till 1 in the morning, looking on the moon and Jupiter with the 12-foot glass and another 6-foot that he hath brought with him. Reeves, of course, had brought along these 2 optical aids tonight, and the sights are mighty pleasant, and one of the glasses I will buy, it being very useful. So obviously the age of the sales was still there. He's a very good salesman, Reeves, bringing around 2 scopes, and he obviously managed to hook Pepys, although by the seam of it, he didn't take much doing. Pepys chose the larger of the instruments, and on August the 19th, 1666, he saw Jupiter with my 12-foot glass. On the evening of 22nd of August, he also wrote, "And so to look upon the stars, and do like my I do like my glass very well." Pepys made several entries of an astronomical nature in his diary. For instance, on March the 1st, 1665, and thence to Gresham College, where first Mr. Hooke read a second very curious lecture about the late comet, amongst other things, proving very probably that this is the very same comet that appeared before in the year 1618, and that in such a time it will appear again, which is a very new opinion, but all will be in print. So he was actually speculating there, according to the lecture that he attended, that they were beginning to grasp the fact that certain comets were going to make reappearances. And in fact, 3 comets appeared in 1618, the last one being the most impressive. It was first seen in mid-November of that year as a tail projected above the horizon. Now, by the middle of December, it was a superb sight, but it was not seen after the 22nd of January 1619. Johannes Kepler was possibly the first man to see a comet through a telescope when he observed one of the other 1618 comets on the 25th of August. Now, moving on, we may well recognize this chap. It is in fact Lawrence of Arabia, army officer, 1888, 1935. And Lawrence of Arabia did indeed consult his own personal diary, which contained some astronomical notes when he was to reassure his troops that during a planned night attack of theirs, there would be a lunar eclipse to baffle and confuse the enemy, which it duly did. Full name, Thomas Edward Lawrence, known as, of course, as Lawrence of Arabia, advised the Arabs in their revolt against the Ottoman Empire. One of the greatest exploits was the capture of Aqaba, a fortified port on the Sinai Peninsula with a small troop of 50 Bedouin. In the 7 Pillars of Wisdom, he reports a lunar eclipse in Egypt that helped him overcome the first defensive position at Kathira. And the actual diary entry reads, "By my diary, there was an eclipse. Duly it came, and the Arabs forced the post without loss, while the superstitious soldiers were firing rifles and clanging copper pots to rescue the threatened satellite," obviously referring to the moon. Now, Aqaba was taken a few days later, and thanks to this strategic port have fallen to the British, the Allies soon recaptured Jerusalem and Damascus. The Turkish soldiers had another reason for fear of the eclipse, and according to an Islamic tradition, the day of the Last Judgment is linked to an eclipse in the middle month of Ramadan. And this was precisely the case on that date. So even Lawrence of Arabia, but I'm sure there's bound to be other military tacticians of the time, actually used this certain eclipse to actually spook the people that he wished to overrun. So a massively clever piece of thinking. And if it weren't for the diary entries, we wouldn't have known exactly why he had done that. But it all becomes pretty. I think I probably missed a slide there. It's actually Virginia Woolf next, not that, but we'll stay with the question mark. I do apologize. Now, Virginia Woolf, of course, author, 1882 to 1941. Virginia Woolf's diary-like, vivid and beautifully exquisite account of the total solar eclipse of 1927 featured in her work, The Eclipse, and published in her book, To the Lighters. Once again, it's a beautifully lavish interpretation of what was being seen. And if you can just bear with me as I read the actual excerpts themselves, you can probably just cherry pick out the actual things you want to find scientifically wise, but let's just appreciate the fact that the way in which she's written sort of explains so much more than just the technical occurrences that's going on. She writes, after my 15th birthday, another worldly wave of darkness intercepted the sweltering August afternoon and plunged it into a surreal cool, the first total eclipse to sweep across Bulgaria since I was a small child. In an hour earlier, the moon's shadow had swallowed the sun in southwest England for the first time since June the 29th, 1927. Having traveled by train to a potential viewing site for the eclipse, Virginia wrote, we got out of the train and found ourselves very high on a moor, boggy, heath-covered, with butts for grouse shooting. There were grass tracks here and there, and people had already taken up positions to view the eclipse. So we joined them, walking out to what seemed the highest point, looking over Richmond. One light burned down below. Vales and moors stretched slope after slope around us. It was like the Hayworth country. But over Richmond, where the sun was rising, was a soft grey cloud. We could see a gold spot where the sun was, but it was early yet. We had to wait, stamping our feet to keep warm. There were thin places in the clouds and some complete holes. The question was whether the sun would show through the cloud or through one of these hollow places when the time actually came. And that made us anxious. We saw rays coming through the bottom of the clouds. Then for a moment, we saw the sun sweeping. It seemed to be sailing at a great pace and clear in a gap. We had out our smoked glasses. We saw it crescent, burning red. Next moment, it had sailed fast into the cloud again. Only the red streamers came from it, like crepuscular rays. Then only a golden haze, such as one has often seen. The moments were passing. We thought we were cheated. We looked at the sheep. They showed no fear. The setters were racing around. Everyone was standing in long lines, rather dignified, looking out. I thought how we were like very old people in the birth of the world, druids on Stonehenge. This idea came more vividly in the first pale light, though. At the back of us were great blue spaces in the clouds. These were still blue, but now the color was going out. The clouds were turning pale, a reddish black color. Down in the valley, it was extraordinary scrumble of red and black. There was the one light burning, all was cloud down there, and very beautiful, so delicately tinted. Nothing could be seen through the cloud. The 24 seconds were passing. Then one looked back again into the blue, and rapidly, very, very quickly, all the colors faded. It became darker and darker, as at the beginning of a violent storm. The light sank and sank. We kept saying, this is the shadow. And we thought now it was over. This is the shadow, when suddenly the light went out. Woolf speaks to that profound, disquieting wrongness in which an eclipse washes our ordinary expectations of the world, our elemental givens of sensory and perceptual reality. beautiful, absolutely beautiful. That is the way to describe an eclipse, which gives you a fuller picture of what's going on. Granted, this is astronomy, this is science, and we need to see the hardcore of things as to describe and try and get to grips and grapple with the explanations of the universe in which we are living. But for me, it can also be a rather sad time that we're losing that sort of connection with the universe. And it brings me on to the last part, really, which is the question mark, which is lost in time. We've come on this journey. I've covered an awful lot of time period in a very short space of time. I understand that, and it may be a little bit erratic at times to take in, or the way in which it was described, but I hope you've got a flavor of what's going on. My argument here is that we start with the cave art, the cuneiform tablets, and there are other methods of which we have recorded over the years, but for me, the diarific information from the likes of Pepys and the ones from the religious sect gave us a snapshot that we wouldn't have had. But when you look at the lavish way in which it's portrayed, I fear that now we've reached an age where everything is confined to iPads, to computers, and to the microchip, that we're losing something with our connection with the skies. They've always meant a great more ethereal wise than just a plain science. I don't know how a lot of you observe and how you take into the skies, but I see the constellations come around seasonally, and I look at them differently. It's almost like seasonal friends appearing, and I would hate to think that the hard iron of astronomy is going to sort of flatten down a more antiquated and lavish way of recording the skies. Okay, we can recording of a meteor at minus 1 point whatever, and a bright train and the color and the direction. That's marvelous. It's a brilliant scientific summing up of a meteor that you might see. But to lose what is the connection between us and the universe, us and the cosmos, because there is the connection. There's a very strong bond that we had, and we saw that in those diaries. It would be horrible to think that as we go into an age where it is quite feasible in the next 10 to 20, 30 years that we're seeing a robotic, idealistic society where everything is recorded in such a fashion that we're going to lose this sort of bond. And for me, I think we probably already have. The diarists aren't what they were at the moment. You've lost all this. And when you're talking about the next generations that are coming behind us, it's this sort of interpretation that goes beyond the scientific link. It goes beyond that in the fact that we are all connected with the universe, the way in which we see it. And it's a much more encapsulating format to describe things in this way than to just have some cold, hard science. But what we're trying to determine in the last slide here is the fact that where does it go next? It will be confined to the computer chip, certainly, but in doing so, you're going to lose an awful lot of the passion and inspiration that has driven us to look at the skies and record them in so many ways and so many different fashions. And that's that.
Well, okay. If you could unshare your screen, Jonathan. Well,
Sure.
I'll hand back to Gerard in a minute, but I, for one, felt that was absolutely a brilliant talk, fascinating, and I will just change over to the gallery view. I'll hand over to Gerard. Well, Gerard,
Right.
well, there's going to be lots of
Jonathan,
questions.
that was fantastic. I'm sure I'm sure you'll agree that there's a tremendous amount of other references that people throughout modern research facilities have found, but it is fascinating. If I may take chairman's privilege and just say, I think there's a similar battle reference to a total solar eclipse during the Sulu Wars.
Yes.
Yes. An eclipse, I think it might have been 1879. A British colonel used a total solar eclipse to prevent a battle, and the Zulus were scared about the evil spirits in the sky. Now, I really need to go away and check that, but I'm sure I've seen a reference.
Yes,
there.
there are several references to battles that were either postponed or they actually came to an agreement, the two warring factions, that they wouldn't pursue this because of what had happened. It was almost seen as a cosmic intervention, if you like, to bring proceedings to a halt. You would have thought it would have been an encouragement to go to war, but they perceived it at the time that it was an intervention, and to actually they made peace on the battlefield because of that particular event. So, and that would actually mirror the certain time periods as to how people perceive what was going on. You must have had a very enlightened hierarchy military at that point that deemed it that way, and it's fascinating to see as we've catalogued over the centuries how people have perceived certain things.
Okay, Hilary Forbes, did you find your reference about the 5 monks observation?
I did. Yes, thank you. In fact, I was just looking it all up as it was fascinating talk, really interesting. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Pleasure.
Right. Thanks, Hilary. Just wanted to check with you before. If you've got a question for Jonathan, if you can, we'll unmute everybody, I think. But if you want to put your thumbs up or wave your hand, I'll try and get to you. If anyone wants to ask a question.
I've got away with it.
Well, I think I did. Sorry to ask another question. Your latest small article in the Sky at Night magazine obviously indicated quite a number of references to supernova.
Yes.
That seems to be a common celestial event that causes obviously derision or whatever.
Yes, there are numerous. I can't remember which canyon it's in, but there are several drawings that have been made, cave art drawings, and they all seem to relate to the one supernova, the Crab Nebula. But there doesn't seem to be any conclusive evidence to support what has been seen. And again, with cave art, you can probably only say it's only one interpretation. There are so many potential interpretations, but the work that they did with dating the actual materials used and in the separate countries, it would seem to near conclusively state that what they were drawing was what they were seeing at the time. It wasn't for any other purposes whatsoever. Maybe hunting was in there somewhere, but the need to capture what was going on outside in the night sky. And I think really building on that, it was the rising of Sirius, wasn't it, over the Nile, with regards to the time to plant, the time to harvest. And I think that was probably the forerunner to these sort of events that would then give the agricultural theme of things for farming and such like. But the cave paintings are fascinating, and it's only really in the last couple of decades that certain takes on certain things have revealed. I'm not convinced there's anything in there bar it's the capturing of the night sky as it was. I don't believe in any coding or whatever. That's just as they'd say on Dad's Army, in the realms of fantasy now, Jones. I don't think that's the distinct possibility that it is a recording of the time. And as the constellations were recorded, of course, that brought in the time element, which gave them the seasonal, and of course with the migrating of the animals when they make their most kills to survive, because it was all down to it was a question of survival at the time, and if they could find a time of the year when they were most likely to make those kills, then it would really reflect on their ability to survive. So it became more of a life thing and certainly not a pleasure activity, and certainly not self-help.
There's quite a number of messages saying thank you for a great talk, and it was yeah,
Hillary Art wonders where the I think I know the answer, but she asked where the cave painting pictures were. Where were they?
There's I believe in the book that I've written, it's there's I think it's the Pablo Canyon, isn't it? I think in Mexico there's the Lasso cave art. There are numerous ones, but I'd have to just check with regards to the most allegedly prolific account of the Crab Nebula supernova. But it appears to be Mexico and the cave art there that has spawned a lot of. I believe as well a significant network of caves was discovered when a dog got lost in a hole somewhere, wasn't it? And on retrieving the dog, it opened up an entire cavern into. So I think it's also.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think that was the Lascaux.
Yes, I think,
yeah.
and I think we're probably not at the point where we haven't found absolutely everything that we can discover with regards to the past. Well, that makes it even more intriguing that we can still look forward to, like archaeological revelations, that there are things still to be found that will give us even more clues. There's a mammoth tusk, isn't there, that's been carved. And they believe that to be, it's in the shape of a man, but it also may represent the constellation of Orion, which would give you one of the first like solid formats of categorizing or astronomy as they sort of chisel away at this as to create a picture of Orion in the sky. It all seems to match, but again, great debate as to whether or not it just simply is a depiction of a human or forms of Orion.
Could I ask a question, Gerard?
Go on, John. Sorry, carry on.
When you are researching for this talk, and I'm guessing you've got other references, how are you actually doing it? Are you just going online and like Virginia Woolf? How did you come across that particular reference? I mean,
yeah, a lot of it came from the last book that I wrote, From Cave Art to Hubble. That's when I seriously got into the caves. And I've researched papers online, like with Virginia Woolf. But it was when I stumbled across this rather lovely midsection with Samuel Pepys, and I thought, which is why Gerard mentioned at the very start, these little nuggets, fantastic, in there, you know, that captured in everyday life, everyday goings on.
Yeah.
This was it. So yeah, a lot of research, a lot of online, but a lot of academic papers that I've waded through, much I must say with very little that came back from it, and it was so it was a lot of time spent and then finding that there was nothing really of any. But I'm absolutely sure of the fact that whereas the article in the Sky at Night magazine was only about 250 words, that there are other references, I'm confident of it, other references made. But I wanted to take us on a journey this evening that covered that essential part when people were away, you didn't have the distractions of the time in order to have to do things, and you could put into a journal so many things. And Pepys's references to all the navigational work and the seafaring work, that is just as prolific as these astronomy snapshots. So I'm sure if you trawl through enough of other diaries, you'll come up with similar observations. But it struck me whilst I was writing it that without all this, and without certain historic societies making the effort to save all this wonderful work that's been written, it'd be lost for good. And by the alternative, and by the sort of for balance, how that is now lost, and how that we have so many eyes on the skies. We have from doorbell cameras to dash cam cameras. We've got it all recorded, but somewhere in there, this connection is being lost. And it's the cold, hard surface of science as opposed to these wonderfully beautiful depictions of what was going on. And it's and it's sad in a way that it has gone that way. A natural progression maybe, but it's just that we should do our best to remember that without any of this, a lot of the scientific work that's done today couldn't be done, because we wouldn't have these references to back up certain things that were seen or witnessed, and we just wouldn't have them there. So it's a complete catalogue, but using a very varied tapestry in order to get them all together.
I'm conscious of the time. However, Jackie has suggested that any of us that still have personal diaries, perhaps will continue this topic into the future. I know a lot of us amateur astronomers obviously keep logs of their observations, and some of that is in great detail. And of course, we have the electronic age to help in that kind of thing. But it is fascinating that you can still perhaps do that for the future. I would just like to say, before I make a couple of announcements before everyone goes away, to thank Jonathan yet again for an absolutely fascinating talk. And I hope you will all indicate your appreciation in the usual manner, please. Thank you.
My pleasure. No problem at all. Thank you for letting me share it. It's a rather odd passion, but there you are.
I look forward to more of your short articles in the magazines in the future. So thank you again.
Pleasure.